has been over the last hour or so, listening to members on both sides of the House. And I can sum it up pretty quickly, Mr. Speaker. On this side of the House, direction, confidence and a plan for action. On the other side, well, we'll come to that in a moment, but aren't they so very, very confused, Mr. Speaker? We've heard about from members opposite tax, spend and borrow. Tax, spend and borrow, and that's all they've got for the New Zealand public. After 9 years in government, the same old tax, spend and then borrow. But of course we did hear about the rebranding that they're going through. Not only is it about going out and listening to everyday New Zealanders, it's about rebranding. And well, how do they want to brand themselves, Mr. Speaker? They want to be known as being funky and they want to be cool. There's a bit of metro thrown in there and certainly a lot of retro. And then they said we need to be creative as well. Well, you know what they left out? They left out desperate and lost. And actually, after the last poll results, Mr. Speaker, I see a bit of depression opposite, and certainly they're looking a little bit sad. So what we see opposite, Mr. Speaker, is borrow big and hope for the best. And you know what would happen to this country if the members opposite found their way back into government, borrow big, hope for the best, and that would lead to bankruptcy. Not only bankruptcy of everyday New Zealanders, but bankruptcy of the government's accounts, Mr. Speaker. You know what the poll results tell me? The results we've seen over the last few days, New Zealanders recognise that, they know it, and the last people in this country to work it out are the members opposite. And long may that continue, may I suggest, to them. Now, I want to talk about taxes for a moment, Mr. Speaker. As I said, the Labor opposition have said if they came back to government, they would raise taxes and then borrow more. Raise taxes and then borrow more. Mr. Speaker, no amount of cosmetic surgery can hide the fact that Labor's reckless economic policies are stuck desperately in the past. But I would give them this and a little bit of credit where it's due. Labor does have a policy. It's a twin pillars policy for the economy. More debt and higher taxes. And can I say to you, Mr. Speaker, and anybody else who may be listening out there at the moment, the Labor opposition, if they find themselves back in government, will put your taxes back up. They promised you taxes over 9 years. They didn't deliver. They gave you a bit of chewing gum, at least enough tax cut to say buy some chewing gum. They took that away as well. And then at the very end of the 9 years, Mr. Speaker, when the last bit of life was almost dragged out of the old dog, they gave you a tax cut at the very death. And it was too little, too late. But what I would say, Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition, Phil Goff, and his finance spokesman would mortgage our family's future to pay for the bills. And that's what it's about, them borrowing. After 9 years in government, Labor was dragged kicking and screaming into giving tax cuts. In opposition, they reverted back to type extremely quickly, calling for taxes to be increased. And in fact, just today, Mr. Speaker, on the television this morning, on the breakfast show, on Breakfast TV, the Leader of the Opposition, Phil Goff, said that Labor would reverse any tax cuts that the National Government delivered. I'll repeat that. Any tax cuts that John Key government delivers, Labor would reverse. They'd leave GST at 15%, and then they would continue to borrow. Well, what a strategy that is. What a policy that is for disaster. Earlier in the debate, Mr. Speaker, Pansy Wong spoke about ethnic New Zealanders, and she said they are aspirational. In my electorate, the ethnic New Zealanders are aspirational, and the polls show us that this is the case, Mr. Speaker. She told us that ethnic New Zealanders want to do better. They want tax cuts. They want a fairer society. They want reward for their hard work. And they're getting that from this government, Mr. Speaker. That's why the polls are telling us things are very good for the government. Cam Calder spoke. Mr. Speaker, Cam Calder spoke about the last government. And he was right to a part, but I want to correct him slightly. He said that under Labor over 9 years, if it moves, they taxed it. If it continued to move, they regulated it, and then if it stopped moving, well, actually, Cam, you were wrong. If it stopped moving, they gave it welfare. And wasn't there a lot of stoppage in our country over 9 years? We're focused on what New Zealanders can do, and we're not focusing on what they can't do. We're backing New Zealanders, and it's about helping everyday New Zealanders get on with their jobs. Kanwal Bakshi spoke about the Indian community in New Zealand. He said they feel they have a secure future. They're confident in John Key and our government. They recognise that we've done a lot of work in law and order. They know we're going to do a lot more. They're confident that the economy and the economic future of New Zealand will get better. And they said, and this was the direct quote, "Thank God Labor is gone, and by golly, haven't they gone, Mr. Speaker." I want to come to the AXA tax bus. The AXA tax bus, and this will only be a second, Mr. Speaker. All over the country, Phil Goff and the Labor Party drove around on taxpayers' money and a big red bus. It should have been